Hey folks, Steve Moore here with Canine Constitutional Dog Training. I've got Incy here behind me, the Transylvanian Hound. He's going to be helping me with today's project. We're going to be working on the process that I take dogs through to help them overcome things like fear or insecurity of novel stimulus, or if they don't have any history with novel stimulus, so like a young puppy, for example, the process that we take them through to develop a positive outlook on life or towards specific stimulus. If you've ever heard a dog trainer mention the word socialization, generally speaking, that's what they're talking about. A well-socialized dog has a more positive outlook on life. They walk into a new complex environment. There's either not a lot of novelty in the environment because they've already experienced most of the things that are there, or the novelty that is present in the environment, they don't worry so much about it because they've had a lot of positive experiences in the past with novelty, and things generally don't go wrong. So they don't worry as much as opposed to, your really nervous dog. They walk into a new environment, they're being bombarded by things that worry them. So generally speaking, your dog's ability to tolerate novel stimulus is not just socialization. Socialization is the one aspect that you have a high degree of control over because the puppy is in your home if you get a puppy from starting at 8 weeks old. If you got an adult dog, then there's still a lot that you can do for that adult dog, but the other components that kind of make up this process are genetics, which you really can't do anything about unless you're the breeder, number one, and then number two are the first 8 weeks of the dog's life, which also fall on wherever the dog was born and where they're being reared for that first 8 weeks of life. If nothing was done during that first 8 weeks of life, and you're truly dealing with a blank slate, well, just be very mindful of the fact that the early developmental markers are very quickly drawing to a close. You're fairly soon after you get your puppy, you're going to be hitting early adolescence, and your veterinarian told you don't take the puppy anywhere until they're fully vaccinated, which I understand. We don't want our dogs dying from parvo, but the good news is, even though you can't take your dog out into the world and expose them to a lot of stuff necessarily, you can still do that safely in a lot of ways, but it's better that you don't, because especially for your young puppy, the first few weeks of this process should really be done in the home, so that you really don't have any excuse to not socialize your puppy properly. If you get a young puppy, if you get an adult dog, you're still going to be following kind of the same blueprint. It's just the difference is the dog has already established either the world is safe or the world is not safe. So you're working to expand on that, or you're working to kind of counteract that as much as you're able to. Like I said, with young puppies, I always start in the home. With adult dogs, I also start in the home, but I will take them out into complex environments to begin with. And the reason that I'm doing that is so that I can get a sense of what the dog is already feeling. So I let the dog take me wherever they want to go when I get out into the real world with my adult dog. Like you can see here, he's 1.5 years old. I've had him for about 4 days, and when I took him to the park for the last couple of days, I really, I'm not letting him pull me everywhere, but I am following him wherever he wants to go. And the point that I am trying to make to myself when I do that is that I need to notice the things that he notices. So anything that he looks at for more than half a second, anything that he seems a little bit concerned about or interested in any way, I make a note of that because I want to be able to bring that into the home to expose him to it. Why is it that we start in the home? Let's look at the baseball bat I've got behind me as one of the items that I'm going to be socializing Incy to here today. If I was to say to myself, I need to socialize Incy to things related to baseball. And so I take him to a field where there's a baseball game going on, there's a crowd of people, there's all kinds of stuff going on. He needs to be able to come to grips with all of the things that are happening at the same time. He can't focus on any one thing, especially if it's all new to him, because there's just simply too many things going on. So the purpose of starting in the home is to get the dog familiar with all of the functions of the various things that he might come into contact with in the real world. So in this case, we're talking about a baseball bat, maybe a baseball mitt, a baseball helmet, all of these things. I want to introduce him to all of the functions of these things so that when he sees it in the real world, that's one less thing that he needs to come to grips with, because he's already come to grips with it. He's just now putting it into context. So that's why we start in the home. When we start in the home is going to be ultimately what you're looking for is that the dog is feeling comfortable in the home, because again, we're trying to limit the amount of things that the dog needs to worry about through this process. So ultimately, it's when the dog is feeling comfortable in the home. I have a couple of markers that I use to identify this. The first one of those is the dog willing to eat food from my hand? So that's the first thing that I do before I bring a dog into my home, is start getting them eating food from my hand. Number one. And then number two, is the dog excited to see me when, first thing in the morning, or, coming home from work, whatever it is? Is the dog excited to see me back in the house? So again, my goal is to start doing this when the dog is feeling comfortable in the environment, not just the environment, but also comfortable with me. We did a video recently about near future predictions, and the goal of training should always be on improving upon the way the dog makes near future predictions, and that's not going to be any different here. For the specific game that we're going to be playing, there are 4 rules that you're agreeing to play by. You need to agree to play by these rules to avoid problems down the road, because ultimately what we're trying to do is convince the dog that not only are they safe in the world, but they're safe with me as well. So rule number 1 is we always work within the confines of the 3 Ds of dog training. So if you've never heard of the 3 Ds of dog training, we're talking about duration, distance, and distraction. They're present in everything that we do. So if I want to teach my dog sit, for example, and he puts his butt on the ground, duration, how long will my dog sit before he's decided sit no longer means sit? Distance, how far can I be from my dog before he says, nope, sit doesn't mean sit anymore? Likewise, how far can I be from my dog and I tell him to sit and he does it where he's at, as opposed to coming to me and then sitting in front of me? So, and then D number 3 is distraction. So what level of generalized distraction could be present in the environment before he can no longer focus on sit? Putting it into this context, D number 1 is duration. How long can my dog be exposed to a thing that might cause him concern before it is too concerning? So generally speaking, when we're trying to help a dog overcome fear or insecurity, stress can go in one of 2 directions. It can scale up or it can scale down. So if the longer the dog is exposed to a stimulus that causes concern and they're scaling up the stress chart, you're going to reach a point where the training is not productive. And so you've got to scale it back a little bit. Number 2 is distance. How close can I get to the thing that my dog is concerned about or that might cause my dog concern before they're no longer, say, your dog is normally taking food from your hands. The closer you get, the dog is no longer taking food from your hands. Or for your really highly food motivated dog that'll take food no matter what, it just feels like they're just taking it out of muscle memory. They're biting your hand while they're doing that because they're not actually focusing on the food. There are all kinds of indicators that the dog's stress is scaling up as opposed to scaling down. And if it scales up to a point, then the training is not going to be productive. So that's rule number 2. Rule number 3 is we never force the dog to stay in the proximity that they're not comfortable with. So, for example, if my dog moves up to, and this is really prevalent when you're working in public because the dog is generally leashed to you. So when I took Incy to the park on the first day that he went to the park, and we walked by the tennis courts, and he was in full-blown flight mode to get away from the people playing tennis because it was something he'd never seen before. If I forced him to stay there with the mindset that the longer he stays there, the easier, the more he's going to get over it, it's more likely in that situation that the dog is going to learn helplessness. I am not able to escape. Nothing I do allows me to escape. And so, the dog doesn't do anything. So it looks like the dog is getting less stressed, but ultimately what they're learning is that the way that I manage my stress is not useful. This is a really good way to teach the dog that they can't trust you to manage the way they're feeling in a complex environment. Number one, and that can lead to things like biting, because fear is the number one cause of aggression in animals and people too. But it's also a good way if in the best of times, it's a good way to teach leash reactivity. In the worst of times, it's a good way to teach biting. Leash reactivity, because the next time I bring the dog to a tennis court, he remembers how awful that was, and he remembers he wasn't able to get away from it. Enough exposure to that, eventually what would happen is, if he's not scaling down the stress chart, which we don't risk, is that the next time we're walking towards the tennis court, he sees that this is happening. He knows that bad things happen when he's close to the tennis court, and so he starts barking and lunging and growling and doing all of these things that are fundamentally space management strategies. So what I taught him is that he needs to be responsible for his own space management in the worst way possible. So that's number 3. Number 2, number 3, we don't lure the dog closer to the thing that he's uncomfortable with. So if my dog has a fear of clowns, like a lot of people do, and we find a clown in public, and my dog is like, nope, puts on the brakes, well, a lot of training strategies will encourage you to lure the dog into the clown with food or a ball or whatever it is. This is a really good way to teach the dog, or not to teach the dog, but to intensify what the dog is feeling about the clown. So rather than getting more comfortable when the dog sees clown because we're pairing something good with the bad thing, you can, number one, a couple of things can happen. The first one is a matter of near future predictions. We can devalue the food. And so that's number 1. And number 2, we can intensify the fear the dog has of clowns, because what happens once the food is gone and the dog suddenly realizes how close he is to the clown, if he doesn't already realize that, it's very likely that the anxiety that the dog was already feeling is going to spike in that moment, and the next time he is faced with a clown, he's going to remember that spike. He's going to remember the most intense emotional connection that he had in that moment. So rule number 1, we follow the 3 Ds at all times. Rule number 2, we don't lure. Rule number 3, we don't force the dog to stay. And rule number 4 is not necessarily a rule, but I always toss treats away from the thing when the dog is leaving it. So if my dog is, and that's true even if he's not worried about it when he's leaving it, I will toss bits of food in the direction the dog is leaving. I'll also toss bits of food on the floor when he's investigating the novel stimulus. I won't toss the treats closer to the stimulus than he's willing to approach on his own. So if he's 3 feet away from it, then I'll toss bits of food on the floor 3 feet away from it. So those are the 4 rules that you're agreeing to play with the dog. When you take them through this process, The steps that go into this process vary entirely based on the functions of the device. So the goal here is to introduce the dog in a controlled, calm environment to all of the functions of the device. So for example, the tennis racket. I don't play tennis, but just off the top of my head, the functions of a tennis racket are, it can sit on the floor like it's doing. It can unzip. Once it's unzipped, the racket can come out of the carrier that was just unzipped. I can pick it up. Once I've picked it up, I can drop it, or I can set it down. I can swing it. Once I'm swinging it, I can move in multiple directions while I'm swinging it. I can hit tennis balls with it. These are all the functions of a tennis racket that I want to introduce the dog to before I take him to a tennis court to watch a tennis match. And again, the reason for that is that we want to make sure that he has an idea of all of the functions of a thing before he's in an environment where he's being bombarded by all of these new things. It's one less thing that he has to worry about when he's in that new environment. So I'm going to be taking him through this process with these 5 items behind me. I'm going to turn the sound off while I'm doing that, and you can have some music playing in the background and follow along if you like, but generally speaking, this is the how and the why that I do the things that I do. And until the next video, I hope you found this one valuable, and we'll see you next time.